Again, my name is David Patterson. I'm the host for this, our Treasurers class, Phase 2 of Northeastern District's Online Leadership Academy. We are really happy to have for our instructor tonight, Steve Stojowski, who has taught this class innumerable times in person. This is his first time hosting an online session, so we're all going to be very what's the word? Patient. But looks like we're going to have a great session in front of us. He also asked that you put some identifiers on your screen. David Eliason, if you would put your name, just your first name, and then follow the instructions on the first page of the session here. And I think we're ready to get started. So Steve Stojowski, it's all yours.
Okay, let's take it over. As you take a look at this first slide, that big paragraph tells you how to put the T0 or the T number, the number of years you've been treasurer, number of years you may or may not have been president, number of years you may or may not have been secretary. That's kind of interesting for me to know. And as I glance at your faces, I can see all that information encoded in just a very economical way. We're going to use this slide deck here. Here's a table of contents for the slide deck. So take a quick look at that now and be assured that we're going to cover all these topics, because when we're in person, we jump around like crazy, but that's not going to work so well for Zoom. So just take a quick look at these slides, this table of contents, and be assured that we are going to cover all these items. I'm trying to get a count of how many T0s we have, because that will determine where we start. Okay, we got enough T0s that we've got to start at the beginning.
That's fine.
Each U.S. chapter is a corporation. You can't be a chapter of the Barbershop Harmony Society unless you are a corporation. Each chapter is separately incorporated. Each chapter has its own unique individual tax ID number, which is a number that the treasurer uses for certain filings. Every chapter in the US, I know we've got at least 2 Canadians with us tonight, is qualified to be an IRS 501c3 organization, which is the numbers that they use to describe charitable and educational organizations. And we are all deemed to be that. Maintaining 501c3 status is very important. It's a requirement to be in the Barbershop Harmony Society, and it means we're tax exempt. We don't have to pay taxes. If we do things that disqualify us from maintaining our 501c3 status, that means we become taxable organizations, and all kinds of crazy things are kicked in if you let that happen. So don't let that happen. So we're just looking at the fact that we're a corporation. Every corporation must have a board of directors. The board, all boards of directors in every state must meet at least once a year. The Barbershop Harmony Society recommends that we meet approximately monthly. They haven't gotten quite so adamant about that lately. And once a year is enough for every state regulation. Barbershop Harmony Society likes a little more often than that. It does not have to be strictly monthly, is the whole point. When you have a monthly meeting of your board of directors, you as treasurer should have ready a financial statement. That's a pretty big deal. The board of your corporation is the one who makes all the rules. It tells you what you have to do within the bylaws which are set forth by the Barbershop Harmony Society. Those bylaws, the actual word bylaws, is something that we do not have the power to change. We can expand on the bylaws by having our own chapter code of regulations, or whatever you want to call that, your rules within your bylaws, but the bylaws themselves are non-changeable. So let's see, I've got your faces covering up part of my screen, so I got to look back and forth to my hard copy here. Okay, we've covered all this stuff. Prohibited activities. There are things which you must never do. The IRS is very clear about inurement. Ooh, that's a very bad word. I didn't know what that meant until I got into the nonprofit world.
Ooh.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. This is a great effect when we're meeting in person, by the way. You're not allowed, since a not-for-profit corporation does not have stockholders that don't own a piece of the corporation, there is no way that they can be paid dividends. There is no way, it's not allowed for you to have any way of giving them financial benefits other than dividends. That also is not allowed. So that's what the word inurement means. You're not allowed to have any benefit inure to the benefit of a member. You're only in existence to carry out your exempt purpose. Your exempt purpose is to perpetuate the wonderful art of barbershop quartet singing in America. Pretty much everything you do has to be within that goal, within that reason for existing, or you're not allowed to do it. And yet there's quite a lot we can do. So prohibited activities include political involvement. We certainly can't get involved with elections or with any pending legislation. Lobbying, the word excessive is prohibited, but lobbying per se is not prohibited. In very, very limited amounts, you are allowed to lobby. Now, the IRS has a very narrow definition of the word lobby. They take it to mean efforts to attempt to influence pending legislation. There are a lot of activities that you could carry on with governments that a lot of people would consider lobbying, but the IRS does not consider lobbying. And that's a good thing for us, because if it were included, we'd have to start counting up the dollars you spend on lobbying and versus the dollars in total. And if it reaches a certain percentage, you're in big trouble. So no lobbying. We're not really interested in influencing legislation. So that's really not a terrible handcuffs on us. Copyright infringement, the secretary is more involved with that, but these are, again, prohibited activities within our corporate status. Now, this last bullet on page 3, we're jumping right into some of the details. When a chapter pays generally a musical director or possibly a featured performer, featured quartet, and they pay $600 or more in the United States in any one calendar year, there are requirements that they file a Form 1099 to report to the IRS the fact that they did make this payment. And that's to force the receiver of the payment to declare it on their income taxes. There are certain exemptions from that requirement. If you pay a corporation, you're not required to make 1099 reporting. But if you do pay, let's say, a featured quartet $1,000 to perform at your show, you have to get a tax ID from someone. The tax ID is either a corporate ID number. It's a number that you can apply for from the federal IRS using Form S4, SS4, and that's a request for a tax ID number. You can be either a partnership, you can be a corporation, you can be any kind of legal organization other than an individual human being. And your existence as a quartet, in this example, means that you already are a partnership unless you have specifically decided to be some other form of organization besides a partnership. I'd like to tell the story of Andy Rooney and what's her name?
Judy Garland.
Judy Garland, there we go. They're teenagers and they say to each other, let's put on a show. As soon as they reach a meeting of the minds that they're going to do something that could possibly get money coming in, they are a partnership, whether they realize it or not. They have formed a partnership. If they knew what they were doing and they had legal representation and legal knowledge, they would then fill in Form SS4 and get themselves a partnership tax ID number. And then when they have their show, their people who pay them $600 or more, that's a pretty expensive ticket even for those days, they would be reported using that tax ID number. A lot of people form quartets, and that means they form partnerships without realizing that they are legally partnerships. So how are they going to provide a partnership tax ID number if they don't even know that they're a legal partnership? Well, they have to, one of them should simply provide their exact name that the IRS would recognize and their social security number. So it is your responsibility to get this social security number or tax ID number when you start making plans to hire these people. And you're going to use that to fill out a form 1099 NEC at the end of the year. We talked about you exist for a charitable exempt purpose. You're really only allowed to do things basically that fulfill that purpose. Now, the form 1099 NEC. Has anyone ever heard of a 1099 NEC? Just wave at the camera if you've ever heard of it.
No.
Okay, or just say no. Have you ever heard of a 1099 MISC, miscellaneous?
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
Okay, forget 1099 miscellaneous. Now it's a 1099 NEC. Effective this year for the first time, non-employee compensation is reported not on the 1099 miscellaneous, but on the 1099 NEC. Too many pages stuck together here. The 1099 NEC is a bit simpler than the 1099 miscellaneous, but the 1099 miscellaneous was a little bit misleading in that the due dates were a little bit ambiguous unless you really scrutinize the instructions. Now, what I'm going to try and do is go pull up another document which shows you what a 1099 NEC looks like. Let's see how this works. Remember, it's my first time teaching by Zoom. Something's coming up. There we go. That looks right. Here's the 1099 NEC. That's what it looks like. Very similar to 1099 miscellaneous, but you don't use that anymore. If you have non-employee compensation, which includes your musical director, and it includes your featured quartets, and anyone else you pay $600 or more during the year, forget about the form 1099 miscellaneous. Now it's a 1099 NEC. And near the end of this session, we're going to show you where those things can be obtained very easily. So let's get back to the slide deck if I can do that. That worked. Okay.
Steve,
Yes.
would that be filed by January 31st? And does it have to be a new scannable form? Readable?
No, you're supposed to use the original hard copy paper you get from the IRS.
Okay.
And we're going to tell you how to. Some people buy them at office supply stores. It's not necessary to spend the money. And on the last slide, page 8, there's a link that shows you exactly where to order them from the IRS. And I am amazed at how efficient and quickly they will fill that order.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's keep going down a little bit here. Okay, Form 1096 is a summary of all your 1099s. The 1099 and the 1096 are both due January 31st. I just was looking through the instructions today for 1099 NEC, and it says February 1st, but you know, it's around January 31st, February 1st. Next requirement, you have to fill out a Form 990. Every not-for-profit 501c3, 501c4s, and a bunch of other 501s have to file out a Form 990, which is an information return. You take a quick glance at a 990, it looks for all the world like a tax return, but it's really not a tax return, it's an information return. It requires a lot more information than a tax return, but usually the bottom line on the last page of a tax return is pay us this much money. Form 990 does not have that. You just have to tell them in great detail what you've been up to for the year. And then you're in compliance with the 990 requirement. That is due by May 15th of the following year, if you're a calendar year basis. Now, the good news is that if you're under $250,000 of annual revenue, you don't have to file a full-blown 990. You're allowed to file a much smaller, much easier form, 990EZ. And further good news, and this is true for, I understand, about 90% of all barbershop chapters, if you're under $50,000 of annual revenue, you only have to file a form 990N. This is also called an electronic postcard. Can I see the hands of anyone who's ever filed a 990N? Just kind of wave at the camera a little bit there. Okay, can I see hands who waved anyone who's filed a 990EZ? I'm not seeing much. I'm not seeing anyone.
Yeah, I did.
Of course, this does not apply to our Canadian friends. They've got CRA requirements, and I can't really tell you too much about that. Did I hear a question? So the 990N, if you've never done it before, I don't know what to tell you, because I'm trying to think back to the first time I did it, and I don't remember how it was the first time. It's something that's very easy to do year after year. I should have, we're going to meet again next week, and I'm going to make up for that next week. I'm going to tell you how to file your first 990N, because I think I saw fewer than half of you raise your hand. I'm just so used to filing a follow-up 990N that I honestly don't remember right now. The next form we might have to file is called a 990T. Now, the Treasurer's Manual incorrectly refers to this as Schedule T. It's not a schedule, it's a form. 990T is a standalone form, and it's a tax return. If you have income that comes from other than your main exempt purpose activities, then you get revenue from that. That's taxable. There are a bunch of safe harbors that tell you when you don't have to file a 990T tax return. In the barbershop world with small chapters, if the work is done primarily by volunteers, you don't have to file a 990T. If you get less than $1,000 of revenue, you don't have to file a 990T. And what type of revenue are we talking about? Well, in the case of the Barbershop Harmony Society, they also put out a magazine, The Harmonizer. And that magazine pays its way by getting advertisements. The fact that they put out a magazine means that's unrelated business to them. So the Barbershop Harmony Society itself has to file a 990T to account for their revenue and net income from running a magazine. And they might have to pay some tax for that. I haven't looked at their 990s or 990Ts for quite a few years, but I used to be very heavily involved with that. So basically, you need to know the 990T exists. You need to know it basically does not apply to you at all. Other statutory obligations. When you get a donation made to you, Tom M., do you have a question?
I'd like to go back to your example of the harmonizer sells ads.
Yep.
Many chapters around here will create an ad brochure for their show.
Do they pay someone to do it, or do they do it with volunteers?
Well, the printing is done by a professional, but we're selling the ads.
Yeah, but who's running the whole thing? Chapter members, right?
We are.
Yeah, and you don't pay yourselves for that, right?
No.
Okay, you're exempt.
Okay.
If it's performed by volunteers, you're exempt from the 990T.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Going on, anytime you receive a charitable contribution of $250 or more, you are required by federal law to give them written authorization, a written acknowledgement of that. I believe that an email is acceptable, but a letter is really nice, especially if someone's going to give you 250 bucks. It's really nice to write a letter. Yes, Charles.
Does that have to occur at the time? I typically send out acknowledgements for tax purposes at the end of the year for all of these.
I would say something that big, you should do it probably right away. I mean, it doesn't have to be right away, but it's a real good idea to do it right away.
Okay.
And if someone gives you little bits over the course of the year, it's another nice touch in January to send them a single letter summarizing their wonderful contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Some recommended language in that letter is that no goods or services were received in exchange for these contributions.
Yeah.
Now, there's a second bullet there and indented under acknowledged contributions. If it's over $1 but under $250, and if it's in cash, they cannot get a tax deduction for giving that money to you unless you give them some sort of receipt. It can be the simplest little receipt, or it can be a nice fancy letter just as nice as if it were $250. But you have to give them something. Now, if they give you a check, or they do an electronic transfer like Venmo or money on electronically, PayPal or something, there is a record that exists. But if they just give you cash with no audit trail, they cannot take a deduction unless you give them some sort of receipt for that contribution. And once again, thank you so much. No goods or services received in exchange, and so forth. Another statutory obligation. Now we're looking at state obligations as opposed to federal. Almost every state has a requirement that if you solicit in their state, solicit means like begging for money, you have to register with them under the charitable solicitation rules of their state, and contact your state's Secretary of State or Attorney General. Those two general categories cover all of the 80% of the states that do have this requirement, and ask them what you have to do. Now, each state will have their own definition of the word solicitation. Obviously, if you're asking for donations, if you have a donate button on your website, you're soliciting, whether you get anything from it or not. If you're doing the soliciting, if you're making the ask, you have to become registered on their charitable state registrations. I think Vermont doesn't have it, but I think the rest of the states in the Northeastern District, I think they all are covered by this. So check with your Secretary of State or Attorney General, see what it takes to get registered for that. And if you're saying, oh my God, I didn't know this and I haven't been doing it and I've been soliciting for such a long time, oh, they're gonna throw me in jail. No, they're so happy to have you come into the fold that they will accept whatever you can give them starting today on a clean slate. It's perfectly fine with them. Because I used to do this all the time in my day job. They're so happy to have you get on board that they don't have any interest at all in going back and making trouble for you for not having registered earlier.
Okay, Steve,
Yes.
just to throw something else into this, the current conflict or impasse between BHS and the Harmony Foundation International.
Yep.
Some chapters may choose to set up their own donation, and so instead of people contributing to BHS and to Harmony Foundation with some monies coming back to the chapter, some chapters may choose to set up their own donation to avoid or to circumvent that other process.
Well, what's their purpose for circumventing the other process? Just to avoid having the BHS or Harmony Foundation take a cut?
Well, no, it's just an alternative. I'm not campaigning for either side in any fashion. I'm just saying that an individual chapter donation is a possibility, and it has been discussed on our board.
Yeah, if a donation just comes to you out of the blue, you can make the argument that you did not solicit it.
Correct.
But when charities are found to be in violation of these rules, they don't look at the level of solicitation activity. They look at how much money did you get, and we'll take 20% of that, thank you very much, as a penalty. So the definition really does not depend upon whether you tried. The definition does depend on whether you tried to get the donation, but the enforcement, which is pretty rare, is based upon the money you actually received. Now, I was starting to say, when you're asking for money, when you have a donate button on your website, you are clearly soliciting. You can't deny that you're soliciting. Some states define seeking new members as soliciting. Some states define selling tickets to your show as soliciting. Not all of them. You have to look into your state and find out what the rules really are.
Steve,
Yes.
this registration, I assume that you did it for Bryn Mawr. Is it one and done? Do you have to refile every so many years?
You file it every year.
Every year.
And a lot of states have the same May 15th due date as the 990. And some of them are June 30th, but somewhere around there.
Steve, is this one solicitation for an entire chapter or for each individual member that's soliciting?
No, it's for the chapter. It's for the 501c3 corporation that
Okay.
has to do this. So as treasurer, you're the guy who gets the fun
Yeah.
of filling this thing out. It's really not that difficult once you get doing a few of them, but actually, you're supposed to solicit, you're supposed to file in every state where you solicit.
Okay,
You might have a chapter with members and supporters who come from multiple states. You're only going to be required to file this charitable registration in all of those states, wherever you get money from, wherever
about a
your
member-
message goes out.
how about a member from Costa Rica?
I'm talking about the United States.
Okay.
States.
Steve,
Yes.
do you have a form number for this?
In Pennsylvania, it's BCO10.
BC010?
I think it's a O like Oscar.
Okay, 010. Thank you.
I used to do every state in the union. It was more than 10 years ago. I don't remember the form numbers in the other states. Now, in addition to and completely separate from that charitable state registration is corporate administrative filings. And this is fairly new within the last few years. We've had to do it all along, but the Barbershop Harmony Society has noticed that this is another requirement.
Mhm.
And you've got to have your registered agent and just a current address where process may be served. It's a very simple thing if you know how to do it. In my chapter in Pennsylvania, we could not find our original articles of incorporation for the longest time.
Wow.
And without that, you can't get started with the admin filings or the charitable state registrations. But now that we found it, to answer your question, Andy, we haven't done it yet. We just found them.
Well, hey, do it by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Do you
At the
mean
end of
by
the year,
this,
I'm no longer the treasurer at Bryn Mawr, and Andy takes over.
do you mean by this the paperwork or the incorporation number?
Well, you need to have a full copy of your articles of incorporation to get started with both the charitable state registrations and with the admin
Okay.
filings. And
Okay,
it's going to have all their information on there, and it's going to be an annual requirement. I
okay,
think in some states it's not every year, but I couldn't tell you for your particular years. Now, getting back to the charitable state registrations and the 990s, this is why I put them all next to each other on the page. In New York, for example, in every state, the requirement that you only need the 990N electronic postcard kicks in everywhere if you're under $50,000. You just don't have to fill out the complicated 990 or 990 EZ. In New York, for example, I think we have one New Yorker among us. Two, okay, at least. You do have to have at least a 990 EZ for the purpose of your state charitable registration, even though the feds don't require the 990 EZ. No good deed goes unpunished. That might be true in other states. Haven't come up with it yet. So as if the statutory obligations aren't enough, we have other bosses called the Barbershop Harmony Society. We have obligations to make them happy. Pay society bills. When I started as a treasurer, about 20 years ago now, everything was done on credit. You order stuff from the society, they send you a bill, hopefully you pay the bill. They figured out they were losing money that way, that sometimes they just couldn't get their bills paid. To my knowledge, the only bill that the society sends to the chapters, the only one I can think of, is the annual insurance. Everything else, they don't extend you credit, and you can't buy music, sheet music, learning tracks, anything else, merchandise from society, unless you pay for it at the time of purchase. So you're not going to get bills after the fact, except maybe for the insurance. If anyone can think of another example besides your annual insurance, I'd like to know that. But it really is not as big a thing, and yet they haven't updated the treasurer's manual that much for that. You have
Steve,
to pay your bills. Okay, go ahead.
can I ask you a question about insurance? We asked this last week of Rob France. Has there been any talk between BHS and the provider of the insurance? I'm not sure what kind of the insurance that the chapters are charged. Is there any talk about reducing that premium, or is it going, because we're not meeting in person, or is it just going to continue on and we're going to be penalized for not meeting?
Well, I remember that question from last week, and my answer is I'm not privy to any such conversations between the society and their insurance company. But it's my experience with other insurances that I've been involved with just in the last 8 or 9 months that when the activity goes down, the insurance companies are pretty good about reducing their premiums. I would be very surprised if after a year of hibernation that they find they have fewer claims to pay, and they darn well better reduce our premiums. That's just my prediction. That and 50 cents will get you a little fake flour or something. Okay, getting back to things we have to do to keep the Barbershop Harmony Society happy. When we file our Form 990 or 990EZ or 990N or almost never the 990T, the BHS wants to see a copy of that. There's also a thing called an annual review. So let's talk about annual reviews. This is all covered in the Treasurer's Manual in quite a bit of detail. So just some of the high points here. I think you've all received a copy of the Treasurer's Manual. A nice PDF copy. Find room in your hard drive to keep a copy of it and refer to it when needed. If you don't find the answer there, you can always give me a phone call or an email. My contact information is up on the first slide. And you're going to get a copy of all of these slides at the end of the meeting. The annual review requirement, it's like an audit, but we say, quote, audit, unquote. It's not really an audit like certified public accountants perform. We couldn't possibly afford them. Annual review is something with the same general idea that someone else, independent, should take a look at our books at least once a year and make sure that they understand what's going on and they have no problem with it. The people who are allowed to do this review do not include anyone, certainly not your treasurer. The treasurer is being reviewed. He cannot perform the review. No way, no how. Absolutely not. In general, everyone on your board of directors is responsible in part for everything that goes on financially, everything you spend, everything you take in. So everyone in the board of directors for the year under review is also ineligible to perform the annual review. Well, then who can do it? I mean, who else is going to be interested besides members of your board of directors and your treasurer? Well, maybe your past treasurer, someone who is no longer on the board. That would be a perfect idea of someone who can perform an annual review. Maybe a friend from another chapter who's got experience as a treasurer would know what he's looking at and know what kind of questions to ask. Maybe even someone who's not a barbershopper could perform the annual review. If they're willing to learn what your system of keeping the books looks like, if they're able to follow it, they're qualified to perform the annual review. The annual review does not require an awful lot of rigorous auditing, but you should have your auditor's cap on your head when you're doing it. I'm not saying you, when the reviewer does his review, his or her, so that they can ask some good questions. Well, why'd you pay this? Well, can I see the receipt behind this? Oh, okay. And then when they take a look as closely as they want to, and this can be done in as little as an hour for a small chapter, if the financial records are in order. And at the end of the hour, or maybe a couple of hours, whatever it takes for them to get satisfaction, they will write a couple of sentences. I have performed the annual review. CPAs always use we, like the royal we, even if it's one person. We have performed the annual review, and everything looks okay. And that's addressed to the board with a copy that goes to Barbershop Harmony Society headquarters, and you file that, and everyone's happy. Okay, I see some nods. Let me look around. I'm sure you wouldn't be hesitant to raise your hand if you have questions. I'm not getting as many questions as I expected, so that's why I'm looking for it. Other society obligations, BMI, ASCAP, and SOCAN. This is your right to perform music in exchange for charging admission. If you sing, maybe at an over 55 community, at a nursing home, here or there, and the organization hires the chapter, that's not something that requires BMI and ASCAP clearance. If you put on a show yourselves and you take care of charging money for it, you have the requirement to file the BMI application in advance and the ASCAP summary at the end of the year. Can I see a wave from anyone who's filed BMI and ASCAP? Okay, let me quickly scroll because I can't get you all in one view. I didn't see too many hands go up there. Can you wave again, please? This time I'll be faster. 1, 2. I only see 2.
Our secretary has filed it. I just write the check.
Okay, well that's what I meant to say. If you've been involved with it, so you're aware of it, the secretary is going to ask you for a check. In most cases, the BMI is $28 per performance, and the ASCAP is around in the low 200s these days. We budgeted to pay BMI and ASCAP for the year 2020 in my Pennsylvania chapter. We're not going to have to pay it because we're not putting it on any shows. Another society obligation. Here's one that you might not have heard of or heard of a long time ago. In your very first board meeting in the month of January, or whenever you have your first one, read into your board minutes the names of all the people who handle cash. And the reason for this is you don't have to submit these names to anyone, but they have to be in your permanent minutes. Because if the names are in there, you are covered for losses. If someone gets held up, robbed, or if they run away with the money, you're covered by bonding insurance. I'm not aware of anyone who's actually had to make a claim under the bonding insurance. But there is a $1,000 deductible for the bonding insurance. And if your loss only $900, you have to eat the whole thing. If you have a loss of $1,500, you get a $1,000 deductible and you only get recover $500. But in order for this recovery to work, those names have got to be in the minutes before the loss occurs. So get them in every January promptly. It's so easy to overlook, but it's something to do. So consequences of non-compliance is your chapter can be suspended. Nobody wants to be the treasurer in the year that a chapter is suspended, and sometimes it happens. There's some examples of that in the treasurer's manual. Just refer you to look there when you feel like reading something.
Steve,
Yes.
could I ask a question about ASCAP this year?
Yep.
We did 2 nursing home sing-outs, January, February of this year, and then, of course, we got locked down by COVID.
Right.
We have to pay that $230 ASCAP fee?
Who paid you? Did you sell tickets to this event?
No.
Okay. If the nursing home or
homes.
community paid you, that's not required. That does not fall under the BMI ASCAP requirement. It's only when you produce your own show.
But I know this chapter has been paying ASCAP every single year, the $200. I thought that was.
Well, if it is in a year that you did not produce any shows where you charged the tickets, you collected money for the tickets directly from the public, you did not have to do that. I don't know if you can get your money back, but it was not required if you'd had no shows. And in 2020, very few people are putting on shows.
Curious. I'll have to check with my, our past treasurer is gone, but.
Gone in what way?
Well, I may be the one that took over. We,
It means he's still alive.
our treasurer was leaving because he was going to be away on travel for half of the year. So he stepped down. Our nominating committee found nobody. Nobody would step up. I was the secretary, so I became the secretary treasurer.
How large is your chapter?
Now 30, it's a small chapter.
Yeah, it's about my size.
Did you leave a treasury book
Uh,
or Quicken or something?
yeah,
You might be able to scan through there
to do what?
to see if they've paid ASCAP more than once for the year.
Well, I know that it was in Joe's reports. He always paid at the end of the year. He always paid $230 or whatever the number was.
Yeah,
To
it creeps up a
ASCAP.
little every year.
Yeah, as for
The
one.
question is, did they pay for it in a year when you did not put on any shows?
Yes, pretty sure of that.
Sorry to tell you, you overpaid.
All right, well, that's good to know. Thank you for the answer.
Okay. And I've never had that question come up before. I'd be very fascinated to know if you can recover the overpayment. It's worth trying. It's worth trying.
Maybe they'll give us a credit.
A credit's better than nothing, but in my opinion, they should give you your money back.
A store credit.
Okay, getting back to treasurer's duties, I think you all are quite used to this. You are a bona fide member of your board of directors. You get a vote just like everyone else on the board. So here's all these bullets to tell your treasurer's responsibilities and duties. There's an even bigger list in the chapter treasurer's manual. So you all received that, I think, in advance of today's meeting. And coordinating with the president and secretary, that's a new bullet I added just this year. Because there's so much that goes on that requires multiple people to be involved. And a week from tonight, I hope that every last one of you will be back for the joint session of the presidents, secretaries, and treasurers. I know that when I make this course in person, we never have enough time for that 1 hour or maybe 75 minutes that's allocated for the joint session. But next week, we're going to have 2 full hours for that, including the break. So I think we're going to have some coverage of the joint issues in a lot better detail than I've had before. So I hope you're all planning to come back. Now, talking about reporting to your board of directors, what does your financial statements, that is your report, your presentation to the board, what does that have to contain? And I'm going to ask for responses to this one. Hands up or any volunteers? We're coming up to our break time, about 2 more minutes. We're going to take a 15-minute break.
Most of the time I give them just a cumulative summary for the year up to that point. Should I be giving them a raw monthly summary as well?
Okay, before I answer that, let's see if anyone else has any possible ideas for what the board requires. And it's a trick question because what the board requires is up to the board. If they want to see a lot of detail, you got to give them a lot of detail. If they don't want to see much detail, then give them what you think they need. My rule of thumb is give them about 110% of what they're going to ask for, and not much more than that. Yes, Tom.
Okay, we do a summary sheet, but we do 4 pages. We do receipts, we do the expenses, which has a lot more lines on it. I do a cash flow printout of the cash flow for that month, and then you do the summary as Don does for the whole year to date, expenses or receipts, expenses, and balance.
Okay. May I ask if you use any?
I can call one up and share it on the screen.
We might get time for that. I'm not sure because we're going to be a little bit rushed. But may I ask what software you use for that?
We're just using Excel.
Okay, bless your heart. I like Excel too. I started doing my first financial report entirely by hand before I was much of a computer guy. And then very quickly I discovered it, Lotus 123, which became Excel. And I just love using that. I looked at some of the proposed software packages like Quicken, QuickBooks, and I see that my predecessor as a treasurer more than 4 years ago used one of those canned programs, and he came up with a 5-page report every month, a fine print that no one could follow. So when I became treasurer, I tried, my first step was just to completely overhaul the chart of accounts. How many different accounts do you really need? And what do you want to see? And what are you going to be able to follow? And my biggest project for my first few months as a treasurer in my new chapter was to slim down the chart of accounts. So our financial reports are now 3 pages of medium-sized type to replace 5 pages of fine print. So I think that was an improvement. Okay, I see it's 8 o'clock. Do we want to take a break now? You want to keep going a little bit? We've got a 15-minute break promised to us in the middle here.
Well, since we got off to a late start because of technical issues, we can go on for a few more minutes, but we can take a break but plan to be back by 8:15.
Okay, let's go. I'd like to just share with you an example of an Excel format financial report. This has got so many bells and whistles you don't have to include. But over the years, I've added and added and added just because I was having fun doing it. So let me pull up one of my chapter. Here's an example. February 2020 was the last month that we're anything close to normal. I made this on Excel. It's 3 pages. I'd like to throw in comments. It's just one example of something you could do.
Mhm.
At the end, we show that the fund balances equals the cash balances. That's kind of important. That's why Donald Duck is so pleased. Okay, let me see if I can get back the slide deck we had. Okay. I spent the last 10 or 15 minutes before this meeting started learning how to do this. Okay, let's just wrap up this page before we take a break. Now, paying bills is not just society bills, and very little of it these days is society bills. You buy things from just about anybody. So when we say pay bills, you pay all your bills. Do you have to pay them immediately, or if they give you net 30 days, when should you pay that?
As soon as you can.
If you have the money, pay it right away because it's so much easier. And do we have time to get into, okay, I'm going to jump ahead to accrual versus cash basis. Where did I put it? Here we go. Basic bookkeeping, the third bullet. Accrual basis accounting means you recognize an expense when you incur it, not when you pay it. And you recognize revenue when you earn it, not when you receive it, which could be different times in both cases. Cash basis is simpler than that. It simply means you recognize revenue when you get it, and you recognize expenses when you pay it. And it could mean that you're paying for something or receiving something in a different period from when it really happened. But the cash basis is so black and white, cut and dried, that it's easy for unexperienced accountants and bookkeepers to handle. And that's what the society recommends for all of our bookkeeping. Now, just to go into a little detail on that, when you receive a check in the mail, for example, and you put it in the bank tomorrow, let's say today's November 1st. Let's say we received it Friday. Friday was October 30th. You don't deposit in the bank until Monday, November 2nd. Is that an October transaction or is that a November transaction?
November.
November.
Really? Okay. My whole point with this question was, whatever you decide, be consistent. I happen to believe that when I have a check I receive in the mail, I then have the ability to either deposit it right away. Usually you can take a picture of it and it goes into your bank account. Or I can wait until the next month so that I can pretend it didn't happen yet. I like to eliminate any opportunities to pretend. I like to do things that I like to get the money in the bank as soon as possible. I like to pay things as soon as possible so that my most recent financial statement will have as much activity in there as really happened and as I can squeeze in there. So I like to recognize things, and that's just me, when I get them. So I received a check in the mail. It was October because it was last Friday, even if it didn't get in the bank until Monday. Just be consistent is the most important rule here. Another treasurer's duty is to be the budget committee chairman. Your budget committee is people that you pick, or your president picks, or you pick together, that you feel have some expertise in setting a budget for the coming year. So it can be just one person. If you're the only guy who really knows about what's going on or cares, you are the budget committee. But you're always the budget chairman, the budget committee chairman. So some of you are going to become treasurer for the first time in January. That's going to involve rolling up your sleeves and doing some paperwork. It's going to involve having your board pass a motion that says the treasurer may now sign checks. If you want someone else besides the treasurer to be able to sign checks, it's up to the board to designate that person. Once you've had your annual chapter elections, you're ready to make that decision, to face that kind of decision, so that possibly by the time January 1st rolls around, you already know what you want to do. Once you have board approval of who's going to be able to sign checks, you put that into, you take that to your bank and you see what kind of a documentation they require. They're probably going to require something called a letter of resolution, saying that the board duly met on this certain day and the quorum was present and we passed the resolution to have A, B, and C be authorized check signers. And another question you might want to ask is, well, do you want to have one person sign a check, or do all checks require 2 signatures? Usually it's just one person because this is not a big operation. But these are decisions that your board makes, and then you go to the bank, probably all of the authorized check signers at the same time. Maybe the bank will let you do 2 today and 1 next week or something. But you're going to have to fill out your bank's signature cards and paperwork. And it takes a little while. It's a little bit of a pain, but it comes with the job. Okay, I think I've got 8:07. It's a good time for a break unless we have some questions.
Let's plan to take a break now, and we'll be back at 8:15 sharp. Okay, guys?
Okay.
And ladies, thank you very much. We'll see you back here in a few minutes. Please do not log off. I apologize again. The classes, the 10 classes that we've done up until now, we never required a passcode. It was embedded in the link, and I do not know what happened. But tonight, that went off the rails, and but please don't anybody sign off. We'll see you back here in a few minutes. We're off to the races. You're on,
Okay.
Steve. Go ahead.
All right, let's go on. Let me scroll up to the next slide. Okay, let me. Here we go, page 6. And as I said, you're all going to get these this slide deck by tomorrow or this week. So you have a daunting task in front of you to become treasurer or to remain as treasurer, but you have a lot of help. We have leadership academies. We don't have it in my home district of Mid-Atlantic, but we do have it because of the wonderful efforts of David here. But you also have other resources. When I had questions, I would call the CFO. At the time, was a guy named Frank Santarelli. You have a district treasurer, John Englander. You have a treasurer faculty advisor. It's like sort of like my boss. And John Santora, you might know the name. He spent many years up in Canada. So if you have questions with a Canadian twist, you can ask John because he knows everything about Canada. You have me. You can call me just about any time. You can email me just about any time. 99.9% of the questions I get are really quick ones. I can answer them easily, so don't worry about bothering me. You also can rely on past presidents, treasurers, secretaries. You're going to be covered this way. So let's get into some of the details about the chart of accounts, how to keep the books. And this again is in your treasurer's manual. I was supposed to have the page all queued up for me. Treasurer's manual. Here we are. It's going to be way down. I think it's like chapter 4. Did I go past it? I got to get rid of the faces here to see what I'm doing. No, I didn't go past it at all. Okay, chart of accounts. How many accounts do we need? How much is enough? How much is too much? Let me throw a question out to the group. Those treasurers who have done this before, about how many different accounts do you have in your chart of accounts? 7 different accounts. Is that revenue accounts plus expense accounts?
Different types of revenues. You got dues and fees. That are,
Yeah, I'm just asking for the number of, I guess, the number of revenue accounts and the number of expense accounts. How many is the right number? What's the sweet spot for you?
we boiled it down.
I have 3.
3 which? 3 revenue accounts?
No, 3 main accounts.
Can you describe them? It's
One-
only 3?
100 account is operating, 200 account is savings, and 360 is chapter activities, members.
Okay. When you pay expenses, do you put them into different categories?
I have sub accounts under each.
Okay, my question really included your sub-accounts. So how many expense sub-accounts do you have? How many revenue sub-accounts do you
About
have?
20 income and revenue, and about 32 expense.
Wow, okay. That's more than we see in the chapter in the treasurer's manual here. So you must have had reasons for feeling you needed more than they recommended. Anyone else want to
We just
respond to-
used the BHS recommended accounts.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone was able to find this to be just exactly right for them. Because when I started, I tried to make it exactly right. And then they started asking my board, I've said the board is the boss. What they want to see is what you have to provide. And if they're asking more out of you than you're willing to give them, they can find themselves another treasurer. But I started out by trying to follow these revenue accounts and these expense accounts. And before we get too far along, this the 220 account, pay as you sing. Treasurer's manual says that is still in operation in Canada. Is this correct? Alan Skinner? Did Alan come back? Does anybody know about Canada, whether that's in fact?
Alan Skinner is from the Cape Breton, Nova Scotia chapter.
Yeah, that's Canada. I don't see him on the.
Did he leave? We're down to 15, yeah. And Fred,
Okay.
and Reverend Fred Granger is from the Dartmouth, Nova Scotia chapter.
Yeah. Yes, but I haven't taken over yet till January, so I really can't answer that.
Okay.
I don't have a copy of the treasurer's report here in front of me, so I do in a briefcase, but not here. So
Okay. Well, the treasurer's manual is on the screen right now. And we also sent you the whole manual separately before the meeting. So when you get a chance, you can flip through these pages, starting around page 16 of 78. And I'm just trying to get an idea for people's experience when they found, oh, the question I was asking of the Canadians was it, do you really collect the money from the members and send it into the society?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't. Not as a rule.
So 220 pay as you sing is kind of obsolete in that case, because it was only Canada that was ever supposed to be, I mean, like 20 years ago, everyone paid through their chapter treasurer. Thank God we don't have to do that anymore. The society bills the members directly. And I just didn't know if that was also the case in Canada.
Yes, it is. That's the majority. All of our chapter members, we have 32 that are paid. They pay online, whatever. They pay right to the society.
So good to hear that, and just ignore the 220 account in that case.
Good idea.
Okay. So these other accounts for the revenue, 300, 310, 320, and so forth. Let's talk briefly about what we use each of those for, because there are a lot of real veterans with us, and there are a lot of brand new guys who have no idea what they want to do. Or first, before I assume that you don't know, let me ask if any of you T0s out there have had any discussion with your previous treasurer about what you're going to use as your chart of accounts. How many revenue accounts do you think we need? You're probably going to want to carry forward what's been done before in terms of just the sheer number of accounts and the level of detail that your board has gotten accustomed to seeing. So any T0s out there who would like to type
Steve,
up
I have no intention of changing anything.
Yeah.
We pretty much have all the accounts that follows what the society has proposed, what I see here.
Mhm.
Even in an active year, there were many of those accounts that never had any inputs, but they all seem to make sense that they could have inputs.
That's the kind of thought process we like to see followed, to keep it as simple as you can and still give the board everything they want. That's probably in a nutshell, what I'm trying to get at. So 300 is chapter dues. When they say adds to cash account 360, I've had a beef with that for 20 years. Cash accounts should begin with the digit 1. Liability accounts should begin with the digit 2. All revenue accounts should begin with the same digit, in this case 3. And all expense accounts should begin with the next higher digit. There's no reason to call a cash account 360 because that confuses it with a revenue account 360. There are enough numbers that you can use a unique number that starts with the correct digit. So the cash account is also called a social fund, and we're going to spend some time talking about that. Cash account 360, I like to call it cash account 160 because that's just money that sits in a fund. It sits in a bucket that can be used for certain purposes and cannot be used for other purposes. And your cash accounts could be segregated maybe into this bank account and that bank account to assign different numbers to them. But the fund, the social fund should begin with a digit 1. We solved that in my chapter just by not really assigning an account number to it at all. We have the operating fund and the social fund. So let's talk about that before we get too far along with analyzing these revenue accounts. Remember that dirty word inure. No monies can inure to the benefit of a private individual. And yet money comes in that we can do anything we want with.
Yeah.
Chapter dues coming in through account 300 and social, other revenues from members only. That's another misnomer I'll discuss in a second.
Yeah,
That can go into the social fund.
Alan.
Those are monies that you can use for anything. You can spend them foolishly if you want.
Yeah, there's Alfred Spencer. So yeah, you're right.
I know. You already discovered that.
Whoever's whispering has a very good microphone. Okay, so we segregate our social fund and our operating fund. And the way our chart of accounts is set up, it's got to be able to feed the social fund or feed the operating fund. The operating fund is only used for revenues that come in from our exempt purpose activities, and it's restricted in the way it can be spent. We're going to go into this in quite some detail next week in the joint sessions, but you're going to get a handout at the end of tonight or tomorrow that give you a preparation for next week. You really have to become experts. As treasurers, you are the experts on what is the difference between a social fund and an operating fund. If money comes in from members only that they do not intend to take a tax deduction for, or they come in through dues, you can use these for any purposes, such as to finance social activities. All the other monies that you get, like revenue from shows, revenue from performances, revenue from quartets. Let's see what other categories we have here. Singing Valentines, performance fees, charitable contributions. As a 501c3 organization, you are qualified to receive tax deductible contributions. In other words, deductible by the donor. If they give you money with the understanding that they're giving money to a charity, you have to account for it in something like account number 340. If they give you money that they understand is not to be tax deductible and can be used for other than your exempt purpose, then it can go into 360. It doesn't have to be from members only to qualify for that. And it doesn't have to be received from non-members to qualify as 340. So 340 non-members and 360 from members only is sort of an oversimplification, is the point I'm making. It depends on the intent of the donor. So we have basically a half a dozen different types of revenue categories. But then they say, if you want to break it down a little further, make it 360A, 360B, well, you don't have to do that. You can make it 361, 362. You don't have to create a fourth digit. No need for that. Now we'll look at the expense accounts. There are more different expense accounts. You usually have more transactions of your revenue, but in fewer accounts, and fewer transactions in your expenses. And my screen just went blank. There it came back. Fewer number of transactions, but more accounts in your expense accounts. Let's go through all of these because I think we're going to have time. They're kind of self-explanatory. Use account at 401 for your rent or your utilities and so on. I'm not going to read every word here, but expenses that can be identified as being for a certain purpose, and your board expects to think of them in these categories. Now, the time to decide, well, is this one kind of expense or another? You look back to the budgeting process. When you created your budget, what was the intent of the board? Because that was probably one of the few times during the year you really had the board's attention. They were paying attention to what we're spending money on, and listen carefully to how they interpret what a certain type of transaction should it fall. If it could go either way, if it could be in one account or another, think back to when you were doing the budgeting, what was your intent at that time, and try to follow that intent. Is it clear what I'm trying to explain here? For example, when you buy stamps, what account would you put that in? Don't all answer at once. And that's another trick question. Stamps can be either show publicity, it can be public relations, it can be general office expense. It's not just 432 office supplies because of stamps. You look to the ultimate purpose behind it. Stamps is one of the few examples of things that are really that ambiguous. Most of the time it's pretty clear where it's going to land. $438 has a lot of words there. Travel and expense, delegates to district meetings. Now that you're going on Zoom, that doesn't exist. Every account in the 440 family, 440 through 449, relate to the shows that you're going to put on. And there again, they're self-explanatory. Let's take a look at account 446, fees and expenses of out of chapter quartet and chorus talent. In other words, when you put on a show and you pay featured performers to come, this is generally where you'd want to charge that expense. When you pay any individual performer or any individual, when I say individual performer, I mean a quartet as a whole. That's a quartet is one thing. Or your musical director, you pay him $600 or more in a year. You have to file forms 1099 and 1096 in January of the following year. But suppose a quartet wants $1,000 as their fee. And they say, well, why don't you pay each of us $250? And then it's below the $600 threshold, and you don't have to file form 1099. How's that sound? I'm going to wait till I get some answers here. I got some thumbs down. Why is that not allowed?
Well, that's kind of cheating, splitting up a single payment to avoid the regulations.
Right. That's exactly right. They're going to try and get away with it all the time, unless they're charging $2,400 or more, and then they're going to split it anyway and get 600 each. But the idea is to have accountability to the IRS for the monies that you pay them. So they have to include it in their taxable income. Now, if they have not had the wisdom to know that they were a legal partnership, then at least one of them has to step forward and say, okay, put this in my name. And within your quartet, within the quartet that's the featured performer, pick the guy who's in the lowest tax bracket, put it in his name. This is not advice for the treasurer, this is advice for the quartet. I also teach a course called Quartetting as a Business, and I go into that quite a bit there. But as long as someone gets reported as receiving the income, the IRS is perfectly happy. How they split it within their partnership, that's entirely up to them. Anything else here that needs to be discussed? City and state taxes 449. That's only taxes relating to a show. When you file your charitable state registrations, which I know some of you were surprised to hear exist, there's going to be fees with that. It's never free. I think it's free in Ohio, but that doesn't affect anyone in this meeting. So that's going to be an expense, but it's not a 449 expense. It's going to be like a miscellaneous, or you can create a category for it. You got more unused numbers here. You can make up numbers for things that the board, if your board really wants something segregated and highlighted, make a separate account to show that. We got plenty we could talk about with using the chart of accounts, but let's just start right here. See that cash account column in the middle? That's account number 360. Pretend that's a 160. So things that come in from 300 and 360 go into cash account 160, and they come out from 460. I like having the 60 at the end, so it just makes things consistent. Money that comes in from all the other 300 accounts, all the other revenue accounts, goes into the operating account. So 100 is another name for the operating account. 160 is another name for the social fund. So pretty much most of what you do is going to be operational. So the money comes in, has to go into the operational if it came from certain places. And when you spend it, it can only be spent on certain restricted purposes. Not, you can't spend foolishly, you can't throw parties for yourself, you can't pay dividends to members. That's not allowed. And here again, examples of unrestricted funds. You can have other unrestricted funds. For example, let's create a fund to buy ourselves new uniforms, or to buy ourselves something else expensive like risers. And you want to, as a board, to say we can only use this money to spend for that specific designated purpose. That's called a restricted fund. So most of your funds are unrestricted, but when the board decides that they want to put a restriction on it, they can do that. When the donor gives you money from the outside and puts strings attached saying, you can only use this to spend on something I want you to spend it on, that becomes a donor restricted fund, and the board does not have the power to change the purpose of that. If they're going to accept the money under that condition, they have to use it only for that purpose. I like to give the example of the eccentric old alum of a certain university who wanted to give his university $50,000 to buy purple uniforms for their marching band. And the university said, but our school colors are not purple and we don't have a marching band. Well, they can't accept that restricted donation. But if the same donor comes back and says, I want to give you $50 million to buy purple uniforms for your marching band, they say, oh, that marching band. Okay, we'll take your $50 million. All right, never mind. I try comedy sometimes. The whole point is that a donor can restrict it and the board cannot waive the donor restrictions. But if the board makes a restriction, they can waive it. So to keep track of these different funds within the fund, if that exists, you have to have a mechanism in your chart of accounts to do that. So I think we're done with this. We can go back to the slide deck. Faster. Okay. Forms 1, 2, 3, and 4. Does anyone have any ideas or stories to share about the software they're using to maintain their financials? I asked once before, we just got one response that they use Excel, but there must be more examples out there of people who use software to maintain their financial activity. Yes, Don, go
I
ahead.
use Quicken to maintain, and I translate it to
Okay, you do the basic number crunching in Quicken, then you present it with some other output.
yeah, I use it, I report it out in Excel.
Okay. I was advised to look into Quicken about 20 years ago when I first took the treasurer's class. And I looked at Quicken and I didn't like it at all. It just didn't do what I wanted it to do. So I show you very briefly an example of a financial statement I made with my own homemade stuff, and I've been adding to it over the years, so it does all sorts of fancy things. I'm looking for people who are happy with other software packages.
I'm happy with Quicken.
Okay. Can you tell me what about it you find useful, or any tricks that you've been able to use to overcome challenges? Is your board really paying attention to the reports it gives you?
I think they're paying attention to the reports. Actually, the reason I switched from I originally had stuff in Excel and I went to Quicken, and I found that it was not as hard to screw up. It was not as hard to screw up Excel as it was to screw up Quicken. Quicken was easier for me to figure out.
Yeah, it's certainly more user-friendly, but
Yeah.
it doesn't give you much control over what comes out.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what makes you happy. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm looking for examples all the time of these. Okay, so I'm trying to see if we have interest in going into the weeds on forms 1, 2, 3, and 4. In the chapter treasurer's manual near the end, they give examples. And form 1 is simply a way to organize your revenues, and every instance, every transaction where money comes in is a separate line, and every possible place to categorize it is a column. So everything falls somewhere in the lines and the columns, so that each line by the total shows you what your checkbook did, but all the columns by separate totals tells you where the money really went or where the money was categorized. So form 1 is the detail of your revenue. Form 2 is the detail of your expenses, where each check is a single line. Form 3 is a summary of your revenues, and Form 4 is a summary of your expenses. And would anyone have interest in going into how that works? Because if you're going to have external software packages, it's really going to do it this way behind the scenes. In Excel or by hand, you can see it happening, but in a software package, it's sort of in a black box that you can't see into. So do we have interest in going into detail on what's going on behind the scenes there, forms 1, 2, 3, and 4?
I don't.
Okay. That makes things a lot easier. Okay, let's go on. We talked about treasurer resources, and this is just a repetition of what you can get from the society or from me if you need help. Let's talk about budgets. We have a good half hour. Might take that long. What is the philosophy of a budget? It has to do with the number of accounts you have and the way your board wants to see them used. Are budgets absolutely required? No, but you'd be out of your mind not to want to use budgets. You predict in advance where the money's going to come from. You predict in advance where you're going to spend it. You hope that you can still come out whole at the end of the year. But let's talk about some of these questions. Must the revenues equal your expenses in your budget? Your turn to talk.
No.
No.
What would be an example of when they should not, when they don't have to be the same?
Well, the budget is a plan.
Yeah, we're just talking about setting up the budget now, not the budget to actual, just at the process of creating the budget. Do we want to create them so that we force them to be equal?
There have been years when we've tried to force that. And there are years when, more recently, where it's becoming impossible to predict revenue sufficient to cover the expenses.
Yeah, let's set 2020 aside as a year, and just in one of your other 19 years as a treasurer. Was it your intent when you sat down to write the budget that you wanted to make the revenues equal the expenses?
Yes.
The guideline. The
Any other
guideline
answers
was
to that?
yes. Yes.
Can you think of any legitimate reason that you would want the revenues and expenses not to be the same?
Yes, to build up your balance, but they say don't build it up too much.
Very good. Okay. It's unseemly to have more than a year's worth of revenue in the bank. You're not really fulfilling your purpose if you have extra money left over. So you can have a capital expansion process. Maybe you're saving up for something really big, like matching uniforms or risers or a vehicle or whatever, buy a building, something, and you can't do it all in 1 year. So you would want a budget that you're going to take in more revenue than expenses in order to build up this fund. This is an example of a board designated fund for a very specific purpose. And that's an example of when you'd expect your budget to say that we must get more revenue than we can spend. On the other hand, if you find yourself with excess cash and you can think of ways to spend it to carry out your purpose, then you'd want your expenses to be greater than your revenues, just at the budgeting process before you've even done your taken in your first penny or spent your first dime. So that's another question about timing. Should budgets be made in November and December based upon projected activity for the current year, because you don't know the results yet, year's not over yet? Or should you wait until January and February once you know your results from the previous year, and then you can put an actual black number instead of a gray number in your budget column? Which is a way to do it? Which is a way you like to do it? It could be done either way.
The second way.
The second way, you like to wait till after January 1st?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to share with you a budget worksheet. See how quickly I can get to it. It's just my way of attacking this problem. We showed a year ago's actual, we show last year's budget, last year's actual, and a proposed budget. Now, however many lines you have, this particular time we had 56 lines of expenses. And then we had another page of revenue categories. And each of those requires a proposed budget. Ooh, how to do that? And your budget committee, who's the chairman of the budget committee again?
The treasurer.
The treasurer. If the treasurer is the sole committee, it's up to him to come up with a number to propose for his board. If he's got other people on his team, it's a joint exercise. So that's just an example of what a budget worksheet might look like. We'll send you a copy of this if you're interested in copying from it. And there's the end of the budget process.
Steve, I maintain a running history of all the accounts.
Yep.
So we've got on a spreadsheet, we've got about 10 years always available to us of history for every account.
Okay. By the way, 10 years, holy cow. Records retention, which is sort of the category for the secretary. The secretary's manual has a schedule of records retention, 7 years for this, 10 years for that, perpetual for something else. But 10 years is on the high side. But it's right now we're talking about creating a budget. In another minute, we'll talk about having actual activities compared to budget. So if you'd like to see this, a copy of this, we'll send it to you afterwards.
Steve, do you have any suggestions for us for 2021? Since we don't know anything about whether or not we're going to have revenues, or whether
Yeah.
we're going to sing, or whether we're going to exist.
One thing we hope is that we're going to exist. That's where we start from. If we're going to exist, what does that mean? If we take in zero money, what does that mean? So the basic idea behind the need for a budget is pretty much the same, whether you're going to have a lot of revenue or little revenue or no revenue. You've got to make a plan. And I can't tell you if you're going to have revenue, but you need to create a budget that will keep you solvent. And right now we just know so little. It's hard to get anywhere from that. Anyone else have ideas about how to budget in this November of 2020 or January 2021?
Steve, I'm sorry, I need to leave. I will see you next week.
Very good. I hope we see everybody next week. And we will send you a bunch of materials. All of these exhibits, may as well send you unless you just don't. Well, you can't tell me you don't want them. I'm just going to send out everything.
Thanks. Good job so far.
Thank you very much.
So a word about budgeting,
Yeah.
if I may. I mean, what I think we have to do is you have to budget what the expenses that you will need to maintain yourself as a chapter.
Yeah.
And then budget as many revenues as you can possibly see. Then you determine if you have enough reserves. And if you don't have enough reserves to meet your operating expenses, then you got to figure out how you're going to raise the money to survive. But you got to start with,
or figure out what else you can cut.
yeah,
It's
right.
a real tough decision, but you got to stay solvent. Or
Right.
maybe the answer is you have to fold your tent and you can't be a chapter anymore. I hate to think of that.
Or merge with another chapter or get help with another partner somehow.
That's a good idea. Yeah. It's not a happy topic to talk about.
No.
One of the things we do when we're doing it is we do wait till January to actually put together the draft, but we go out and we ask each of the departments and agencies, what do you anticipate needing? Office supplies, sheet music, whatever.
That's certainly
So
part of the
we have an
process.
idea, but
Yeah.
we have a history of what the budget was. In my case, going back to 5 years, and what was actually spent. So we budgeted $8,800. We spent $7,231. Okay. So we know we were close. So we budgeted for 8 the next year, but we only spent 6.5. You have to play with it from there. You see what you're doing over time and what is growing and what is shrinking. And then you can budget for that. And you have to watch your expenses. You have to watch your receipts to see if you can come up with the same number at the bottom when you get done. And quite often the budget is actually a negative budget when you finally put it together. But when you actually run it, you didn't spend some money here, you didn't spend 50 bucks there, and you come up with a positive at the end of the year.
I'd like to discuss a word, conservatism. It's a good policy in budget preparation. Conservatism means let's err on the side of underestimating our revenues and let's err on the side of overestimating our expenses and see if we can still come out okay. And then if we're too conservative and you do better than you thought you were going to do, that's great. But if you weren't conservative enough and you run out of money, you could be bankrupt. You could be out of business. Of course, if you have a good cash cushion, you have protection against being off on your budget. If you don't have a good cash cushion, you could be in real trouble if you weren't conservative enough when you set your budget. So is a budget something you can revise in mid-year? What are your thoughts?
Yes.
Okay, my philosophy, well, let's hear from your thoughts. Yes, you can. Under what circumstances can you change it in the mid-year? Or should you change it in the mid-year? Or must you change it in mid-year?
One example would be you figured that your course manager is going to book the same number of shows, performances did the last year, and you find 5 new clients. So now you've got new revenues. You got to do something with those revenues. What are you going to do? It's up to the board.
Okay. But is that a reason to change your budget? You can do better than you budgeted, and that's fine, and you can end the year with a surplus. So I'm asking, do you need to change the budget, the number against which you compare your results, or can you just let it compare and look good?
You don't have to, but since that's revenue that you didn't know about in January when you were making your draft, you might want to consider, oh, we left out sending our people to this, or sending our director to Harmony University. Now we have the money to do it. So you might, and if you're going to spend money, you better have a budget item for it.
Okay.
Well,
So
I don't think you change your budget though. You just change your budget, your projected year end. So,
I think the budget should remain the way it is, and then it just gives you that much more information for changing that for the following year's budget.
okay, that's good.
I would disagree. If you don't have, if the board hasn't verified or said in a motion that we are going to spend in this budget, we are going to spend this money on that. And if you run out of that money, I would think that the board would have to say, well, do we deficit spend? Well, maybe we are micromanaging too much, but I've always been informed that anything involved with money, there should be a motion in your board meeting minutes that cover that. And if it's not in the original budget, that's a budget amendment to me. You could, maybe it's semantics. I don't know.
Yeah, and once again, I go back to my catchphrase, the board is the boss. If the board thinks the budget is written in stone, then it's written in stone. If the board is willing to approve variances from your budget in real time, we really want to spend this money. We have the money. It's not budgeted. The board makes a decision. We'll spend the money. It's for something we want to do. We didn't know we were going to have the money to do it. But the time to, no, I'm not going to say that yet. Is a budget a carte blanche to spend money?
No,
Why not? When is it not?
if you exceed the expenditure categories that have been approved in the budget.
But I'm saying, let's say you budget $1,000 for a certain purpose.
Right.
Does that mean that anything you want to spend up to $1,000 is automatically approved?
No.
I think it is, if it's in that category.
What does your board think?
Well, I'm assuming it's the board. If the board thinks differently, they say so.
Yeah, because what I'm trying to get at is have your board be aware of these questions when they decide that they know what a budget means. A budget really means what the board wants it to mean. A little Alice in Wonderland here. What do words mean what I want them to mean? I can give you a good example. Well, let me call on Tom first with what he's going to say, and then I'll give my example.
When you put together an expense budget, you're doing a conservatism. You've overestimated. So your budget, your line item for $1,000 is, we might wind up having to spend that. But the directive to the people, the directive in the board is, if you don't have to spend 1,000, don't. If you can get it for 950, do it. Okay.
Good.
You're not, this is not a federal agency where if you don't spend the money, you don't get it the next year. This is, if you don't spend the money, then we have more money to carry over to do something next year.
Fine, good.
If the budget is not a one-page and set it aside. You approve the budget, we put the budget or the expected budget items or the, let me back up. I washed my mouth. I can't do a thing with it. We put a column on our financial reports that go out every month or for every month that says that the budget for line item 300 was $80 or no, was $200. And we have not collected all of that 200. We're still $80 short. Okay. We need to know that, the board needs to know that as we are going along to say, what do we need to do to go find this? Performance fees. At the moment, we have a budget of $500 and we have a $500 shortfall because we are not able to perform.
You talking about your 2020 budget?
20 budget. The variance is 500 short. We have a variance column there so that the board can look at it and say, why is there all this red? It's because we didn't have any money coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have red on the expenses side, why are we overshooting? So, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to give two extreme examples to really show you what I was getting at.
Okay.
I was once a treasurer of a chapter that had a budget of, let's say, $100 for miscellaneous. And we had a guy who always did the announcing. Wasn't a great singer, but he was a great announcer. And he went out and bought a portable amplifier for $50, figuring that it was within the $100 miscellaneous. Did I mention the category is miscellaneous? And he went out and bought it, and he presented me with the bill to pay. And I said, but the board didn't approve this. He said, well, it's within the budget for miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is such a vague term that you kind of need a little more guidance in how to spend your miscellaneous money. We made him take the amplifier back, and he had to live without it. Had another case where a certain amount was budgeted to send our assistant director, who happened to be a kid and still in school, zero income. We budgeted to send him to Harmony University. He got a scholarship for the actual tuition, but we had to pay for his transportation. So the budget committee met. This line was right there on the training line. It says, we need 300 and whatever dollars to buy this kid a round trip airline ticket to go to Harmony University. And then the board approved it. I went out, and I guess I didn't tell the board that I was telling the kid, okay, you've been approved to go to Harmony University. You can buy a ticket. So he bought his ticket. He went to Harmony University. He came back and presented us with a bill. And the board's, one guy in the board said, we didn't approve this specific thing. Well, you really did. That whole one line can only be used for one purpose. And you approved it. But since they didn't say, may I, Simon said, may I, whatever, they were upset with me for doing that. Well, we paid the kid because it was the right thing to do. But there's an example of something so specific that it probably doesn't need further approval to spend it the way it was intended at the time it was budgeted. And expenditure came 6 months later when everyone forgot that they had approved the budget.
Steve, I thought what you might be getting at, one of the things that Bruce said, I think he said it, we don't believe that we have to micromanage the budget as long as it's specific enough. We know what the money is for.
Yeah.
And if we haven't overgone the budget yet, the person responsible for that expenditure doesn't have to go back to the board every single time they get permission.
Okay, but
has given permission. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Here's the thing that I thought you were going to get to.
Yeah.
$1,000 item. It's November. We've only spent 50 of it. Oh, let's go out and spend $950. No. Don't do that. That's what I thought you were getting at.
Yeah, my first example.
A carte blanche?
Right. My first example was something as vague as a miscellaneous category. We only had $100 in there. This guy took it on himself to decide that he's going to spend more than 50 of it because he thought it was there for him. And in that case, no one on the board knew he had any idea of buying this amplifier. So that's why I said, in that case, you really need further approval. And in the second case, the exact opposite. It was approved for one single, solitary, unique event, which did happen. And in that case, I felt we did not need further approval. So
you were right, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
These
Those
kinds
are the
of
two
things.
extremes.
I think these kinds of things are important things for the president, secretary, and treasurer
Yeah.
to know. If the treasurer has a question, he or she should speak to the president and secretary, and generally they would know the tenor of the board and whether it needs to come to the board before or should be reported to after the fact. I mean, you don't, and who has authority to go out and buy that amplifier? I mean, there are only so many people who should be allowed to sign.
Well, he
or
was
have
the only
access
guy
to
doing the announcing, so he thought it was
Yeah.
his decision
Well,
to make.
Well, that was a mistake. It's like, that's the guy who's supposed to buy the music for everybody doesn't just go out and buy any music he wants. So,
Very good point.
Steve, we have about 10 minutes.
Okay. And I'm willing to stay later if David and Diane are willing to stay, but we'll try and wrap up in 10 minutes. The whole point about can it be revised mid-year? If you've got a cash cushion, it's easy just to let the variances accumulate. But if you're going to run out of money, you darn well better change it in the mid-year to make sure you don't. That was my whole basic point to be made. Okay, anyone want to go over some basic bookkeeping? We assume you all know how to maintain a checkbook. I don't think so. Okay. Succession planning. You don't want to be the only guy who knows how to keep the books. In the other positions of president and secretary and maybe marketing guy and a lot of other positions, it's a real good thing for a guy with expertise to keep doing what he does really well. As a treasurer, you're also learning to do what you do really well, but there's another reason to step aside from time to time. I have never served as treasurer more than 4 years in a row. Right now, I'm wrapping up my 4th year. It's just not healthy to have only one person be the only guy who really understands the books. Someone else needs to get in there. Thank you very much, Andy, for stepping forward. Any thoughts about term limits on treasurers as being different from the other positions?
Well, I wasn't, when I became secretary 5 years ago, and I'm still secretary, it wasn't at the annual meeting. It wasn't at the election. The nominating committee found nobody, and our current secretary said he's stepping down no matter what.
Yeah, sometimes they die.
So, well, he didn't die, but so term limits, good Lord. Nobody was stepping up, and you can't run a chapter, I don't think, without a secretary. And the president can't be the secretary as well. It can't be the same person. So that's how I got into this.
And
And again,
the president and the treasurer can also not be the same person.
no, it can only be secretary treasurer, which I am, because we lost our treasurer and our nominating committee found nobody. Nobody would step up.
Thank you for stepping forward. Had there been no one in this group who held both hats, who wore both hats at the same time, I would say you have to be crazy to do both jobs, but that's not the case now.
Well, our past president stepped forward to take over the secretary part so I could just do the treasurer, which is a big help because both of those positions do an awful lot.
Okay, well, the president can't really be the secretary, but anyone's allowed to help you. You can get an assistant treasurer, an assistant secretary, anyone who's willing to help, accept the help. Okay.
We have a situation where the secretary has been saying he's got to step back. He's got other commitments that he has to take care of. And he decided he had to pull the plug on this one. So what we've done, because nobody wants to take on the whole thing, we have a recording secretary, we have a corresponding secretary, and I'm covering whatever secretary, treasurer type things fall over onto my side. So we've split that position up into 3 or so people.
Whatever works for you, whatever floats your boat.
The recording secretary is doing a real good job. We're not going to fire him anyway, but I had maybe a 3 or 4 month overlap with my predecessor to find out what was going on and then get sworn in as the treasurer. I was able to consult with him after the fact a few times. But you better have a deputy treasurer in the wings before you quit.
Yeah.
Could I throw something in here? On the member center, on the chapter leaders page, it only will pick up one entry for any officer, even though they may have the same end dates. And we've run into that with a few chapters here in the Northeastern District where you have a treasurer or a secretary, and that's an acting secretary, and one who's on the way out, or maybe somebody who's on the way in, but they're both listed as the chapter secretary or treasurer. And when the list, as far as what Barbershop Harmony Society sees, is just one entry. And so you have to be careful of that.
That was my question to Tom. How the heck does that work? Because only one person can do what he needs to do on Member Center.
Well, they have to do it under the table, but as far as reporting to BHS, it only recognizes one name.
We found, if I'm following what you're saying, we found a way around that only recently in the last few years, the Barbershop Harmony Society allows you to create office categories. We actually have a third temporary assistant vice truck driver, and I have also the fourth vice temporary assistant truck driver. You can make up any titles you want, and they will come up when you list your officers, and that can be informative to see who's doing what.
But those roles don't give you permissions. They don't give you database
Okay,
permissions.
that's a good point.
That's an issue. Yes, that's exactly the point.
I do have my key to the truck. You're right. Yeah.
We had the exact same thing, and it doesn't work.
What is it? O.C. Cash was the third assistant secretary of the society when they first started.
So that's a very good point that Terry's making, that you need to put the right guy in with the title that gets him the rights that he needs, and then be creative in titles that don't require rights.
The corresponding secretary is the one that's going to be talking to Harmony Society. He's going to be talking to the external. He's the name that they are going to be sending renewals and all the other stuff to. Recording secretary is within the chapter. Minutes, business, okay. That doesn't go outside. So we have our corresponding secretary who's going to be the name
Mhm.
that BHS is going to tag, and we'll go from there.
That'll work. Just be thinking of the rights you need, and they're probably going to get covered. Really quickly, I have some additional topics I want to touch on very briefly. Let's go to that last bullet. Does nonprofit mean vow of poverty? We had some people in our boards many years ago who thought that if we have more revenue than expenses at the end of the year, we have to do something with it. We have to give it away. We have to spend it on something. No, you're not allowed to give it to individual people. That's enormous. Ooh. But you can accumulate cash reserves up to a point. There's nothing wrong with that. The bullet above that, change of address form, IRS form 8822B. When you change treasurers, this is a new form. It's only in existence a couple of years. You fill it out to tell them who the new treasurer is. In fact, anytime someone on the board changes, you can fill that out. After that, when you file a 990, if you're filing a 990 EZ or the full-blown 990, there is a place to check a box at the top of the form that says if someone has changed. But that's like a backup to the form 8822B. There is no penalty if you don't do it, but the IRS wants to know who's the primary contact. It's very easy to fill out. There's no fee, there's no penalty if you don't do it, but please do it. We talked about contracts with featured performers, about not splitting that $600. Enhance your social fund. If you feel strongly that you want to build up your social fund so that you can spend it on parties and things and have truly discretionary money to spend, you're going to want to find every excuse you can to put money in social and not put it in operating. We're going to send you some materials that we're going to go into very deeply next week. You're going to get materials before then that you're going to study a little before next week, so you'll know all the answers. But basically, here's a perfect example of an afterglow to a show. If the public is invited, then it's an operating revenue and operating expense afterglow. If you want to enhance your social fund, don't invite the public to your afterglow, because the excess has to go into operating. If you are going to charge more than it costs you to run the afterglow and you don't open it to the public, then the excess can go into your social fund, because the revenues are social and the expenses are social if it's not open to the public. So depending upon whether you plan to make a profit or not on your afterglow, keep your social in mind as part of the reason you do it one way or the other. That last thing, visit HTTP, www.irs, so forth. That is a wonderful source of all the forms and publications you need to be a treasurer. Your form 1099, those three, NEC, 1099 NEC, form 1096, your instructions, things like this. You can get all you want. Just log on to that site. It is so easy. And believe it or not, the IRS says that you're going to send it within a certain amount of time. They send it even faster. Everything I've ordered for there, you can order 2 years at a time, current year and future year. It is such a wonderful resource, so be sure you use that. And with that, it's 9:16. You want to keep going a little while? I will take any questions you want.
Well, let's take a last couple questions. Okay, all right.
Oh, I thought you had some questions.
Well, we had a lot of people asking questions earlier, so I think that at least that was successful. I want to thank our guest instructor tonight, Steve Stojowski. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you for the Polish pronunciation. You did very well.
Thank you. You instructed me very nicely on our first conversation.
Well, that's right. That's right.
But anyway, thank you all. Again, later within an hour, I'll be sending out the survey, the 5-question survey with optional comments. Please, everyone, fill it out. It's important. It helps us in making our plans for the future. Maybe not for this Leadership Academy, but for our next one, whenever that may be. And chances are it will be online. That seems to be the way to go. And to have fellows here from Nova Scotia and other classes, people from all over the district. This online format is wonderful. It takes away all the physical barriers from attending a leadership academy. We're learning a few lessons as we go along. We'll open it up to even more classes. So there's a lot more coming down the road, and we want everyone to feel like they're part of a team here, part of a district, that people are out there willing to help and are eager to help. So don't hesitate to ask. And then tomorrow I'll send out the link to the YouTube video for you to look at, and along with a number, I think there's 7 or 8 attachments that will be coming that Steve sent along to cover the material he did tonight, along with a few additional things, and a list of his favorite food and movies. But or maybe we won't send that one out. But in any case, and also something for next week for the forum. So there's lots going on. Again, thank you very much for being part of this historic event. This first time Leadership Academy online, it's been quite an experience, and I apologize for the mix-up with the link. I've discovered why it happened. I have yet to find the cause, so I'll just be smarter next time. So anyway,
David, very quickly before we all go.
Yep.
I just went back to my file explorer and I saw a few files that we did not discuss. And I had just had a couple of quick things to say about them. I'm not suggesting we take time right now, but just let me send all the attachments to the group. I have all their email addresses.
oh, okay.
Let me take care of that with a little explanatory things of what I forgot to say. And I'll
Okay.
take care of all that.
But I'll send out what you sent me.
No.
Well, I'm talking about all of these things on the file explorer that I'm listing right now.
Oh, so everything you sent me, you want to go ahead and send all that out?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I will do it.
I'll let you do that. So
So
everyone,
you do the
notice-
YouTube, I'll do the rest.
I'll send out the YouTube link tomorrow when the file is uploaded to YouTube. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of the evening. Take
And
care.
see everybody next week.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.